live in just 5 seconds.
Okay.
And if it doesn't work, we'll log back in and try again.
All right. It says it's streaming.
All right. Well, good deal. Good deal. Well, good morning, everybody. It is 9 o'clock on this beautiful Wednesday morning. Welcome to Cafecito con Colon. And for those of you that follow my broadcast on a daily basis, you know that I have, over the last week and a half, mentioned on several occasions my personal feelings and emotions and journey trying to process and understand better my role in engaging in a positive conversation about a very negative set of circumstances. And that, of course, was brought on by the killing, murder, and death of George Floyd. And far too often in the last 6 years or so, we have found ourselves in conversations like this, but I think this one is different. And we will ask our guests over the next course of a week or a week and a half of broadcasts of Cafecito con Colon why they think this is different. And I've spoken to many people offline about why they think it's different. And I'm anxious to see what our guests have to say. When I woke up Tuesday morning and realized that for me, this was a situation where I had to bring people to the show that could help me process and to help our viewers better understand this time we're in. I immediately canceled all the previously scheduled guests and said that I was only going to bring on people who were trusted voices for me from the African American, the Black community, to help me and to help me be the human being that I want to be. And that's one who does his best to understand the plight of others and to understand the path of my sisters and brothers who I'm blessed to interact with on a daily basis, and being a leader in a society that I care deeply about. And it was instantly that I realized that the first person I was going to reach out to was Cathryn McGill.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and instantly she agreed to come on. And that speaks to her. It speaks to our friendship. It speaks to the fact that she is one of those individuals in our community, one of my friends, who I consider to be what I call an accountability partner, someone who holds me accountable, that is willing to have difficult conversations with me. And one thing that I would challenge everybody to think about is, who are your accountability partners? Who are the people in your life that are willing to have the difficult conversations with you, who are willing to hold you accountable for your actions, for the lens you look through, and whether or not you are trying to sharpen that view on a daily basis, and whether you are the best version of yourself that you were created to be. And that's really what I try and do every day, is be the best version of myself I was created to be. And I think sometimes we wrap ourselves in data points that make us comfortable, whether it's the fact that this morning I have breakfast with the first breakfast I have out in public since COVID-19 in 10 weeks, my first face-to-face meeting in 8 weeks, with a young man I've mentored for years, who is a young African-American man of color who inspires me, who I have poured into, and who I love like a son. And I wrap myself in that data point and feel like, well, that means that I can't be racist in any way. And that's just simply not true. And I think that we have to recognize that in ourselves, and we have to always question our actions and our approach and our conversations. And we have to understand what microaggressions are. And we have to understand what systemic racism is. And we have to understand our journey is much different than the journey of a Black person, or even the historical context of a life of a Black person, of what it looked like for that person's story 2 generations ago, or maybe even 1 generation ago. And if we don't take the time to learn what those stories are, to really try and understand and hear those stories, then we are doing a disservice to ourselves, to our community, and I think we become part of the problem. And so for me, the next week to 10 days of Cafecito con Colons are going to be dedicated to providing a space for me to learn, to be a better human being, to be more aware, and to be a better ally to the members in my community who have been marginalized for hundreds of years. And as we sit here today, they are marginalized in our community for whatever reason, whether it's because incarceration rates are where they're at, or whether it's because poverty rates are where they're at, or whether it's simply because when I talk to young men of color, as I've done work with Rodney from UNM for years with the Men of Color program, for years, which again, all of a sudden, so now I feel good because I've done work with that program, but that doesn't mean that I don't commit acts of microaggression or that I don't properly understand the lens that those young men of color look through well enough. But as I do that work with Rodney or in my community, and try to understand my friends who find themselves in circumstances where they walk in to a store and all of a sudden, even though I'm a law student, he's a law student, loss prevention follows him, but not me. And if you think that that is a one-off situation or an anomaly, I will challenge you to reevaluate your beliefs. Because I can assure you, if you talk to enough people of color, you'll realize that that is not a one-off situation. And it's troubling. And we have a role. And I'm not sure exactly what that role is, but I hope that over the next 10 days, I'll have a better understanding of what my role is in falling forward and building a better society and a better community. And for me personally, being a better ally. So with that, I know I normally post up a ton of links, and I've opened up a ton of links to post up this morning, and maybe I'll get to them, but I think it'd just be more helpful to just get right into it with my dear friend. And I'm going to start by kind of asking her, and actually I've done about 65 or 70 episodes of Cafecito con Colon, and you are going to be the most frequent guest because you were the only guest I brought on twice now.
Hey.
So you're a star. You're at the top of the list. You're at the front of the line. You're my dear friend. You're someone I love and respect and who guides me on my journey and holds me accountable. And my accountability partners are probably most important in helping me be the man that I want to be, which is the best version of myself that I was created to be. And so, Cathryn McGill, you're a star. I love you much. And I say thank you for coming on Cafecito again for number 2.
Thank you. Brian, I want to just say to you that I really appreciate your words, and I'm here today as your friend and to have a conversation that's about me, Cathy McGill. I want to make sure in this instance that people understand, and wherever I show up, that people understand that I don't speak for the entire Black community. Anyone who says that they do, I always say, run, don't walk away from that conversation. I'm coming to you with my lived experience, with my work and my upbringing, and what I believe is a measure of wisdom that I've been able to gain over time. And so I just want to frame the discussion that I show up here like you, saying, let's just have a conversation, because at the base of all misunderstanding is a lack of communication. And, you know, the fact that sometimes people think that communication has occurred when it hasn't. And Oprah Winfrey said something that I found to be really meaningful when she talked about what she attempts to do whenever she's giving an interview. And the ones for her that are successful are based on, do you see me? Do you hear me? And does anything that I have said to you matter? And so I think if we can, have those kind of conversations, I'm working on myself to personally have those kind of intensive conversations about being seen, heard, and understood. And, really working personally for myself uh, to look at myself, to introspect, to reflect, and then to do what I need to do in order to be the best version of myself.
Well, your version of yourself is a very powerful version, and your
Thank you.
life of service, you are welcome. Your life of service has been impactful, whether it's your work that you've done in helping educate us with Black History Month here in New Mexico. As for those of our viewers that don't know that, you are the founder. And is your current title executive director? How do you refer to yourself in that role?
Well, I still have to vacuum the floor, so I'm just here doing what I need to do. And I want to like not do titles today, but I started with the help of a lot of people, the New Mexico Black History Organizing Committee. And in 2021, we'll be celebrating our 10th festival year.
Yes.
And I have recently started the New Mexico Black Leadership Council. It came out of some work that we started in 2014 called Assets. And so we could talk a bit more about, some of that as we go along. But let's just say I'm Cathryn McGill, that my mother was Ruby Carter. She was a brilliant Christian woman. And I believe that all that I am and all that I ever hoped to be was as a result of things that I learned from my mother and from my father, who I didn't have a great relationship with, but who was a brilliant orator and pastor, Dezo McGill. There are two people in the world named Dezo, my father and my brother. And so for those two individuals who made me who I am, I'll just say that I'm Cathryn McGill, and that's my title.
Well, I love that title. I do think it was important, though, to provide a little context to our viewers that may not know your body of work and your impact. So I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you. We'll talk about it, as we go along.
Sure. You said something really powerful when you talked about Oprah Winfrey's quote. And one of the things I wanted to post up today was Malala's quote, where she talked about when the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes very powerful. And I think that for far too long, many of us have been silent.
Right.
And so I'm thankful for your voice being powerful, because it has been, even sometimes in my silence. And so I posted that quote up because when I thought about it this morning, I thought of you too. And you have been powerful.
Thank you very much. And, just so, your viewers know, it's like, I'm that person, who's sending you messenger quotes in the middle of the night. Brian, what about this? And I appreciate you having patience to look at those things and to be willing to have conversations about them, and for us to remain friends, and that we can disagree without being disagreeable. That's something that I'm learning over time. And, probably 10 years ago or 15 years ago, when I was starting to do this particular kind of work, I made lots of mistakes in terms of how I approach people. And so I'm really trying to, work on myself too, to say, how can my message be effective? I have a brother that lives in Japan, and he talked about the game of Go, which in the game of Go, if it takes 6 points to win, you have to give up 5.9 points to your opponent. And so the margin of victory is the difference between 6 and 5.9, which is really an Eastern philosophy of engagement. It's not the Western philosophy where we have total annihilation, but in the Eastern philosophy where you allow your quote unquote opponent to have some agency and to really, kind of save face, if you will. And so my brother was having a conversation with me all those years ago about, and using that analogy of the game of Go, where he said, Kathy, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And so I think that, in the early parts of my career, and even sometimes now, I conflate those two things. And while I know that, and, as we framed earlier, I'm talking about me and how I engage. That even though sometimes I know I'm right in my deep place of knowing, that I know 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 that this is true. How do I work on being effective? And so I think, for me and for others, that perhaps that's a point of introspection that we can begin from. It's like, am I being effective in this moment?
That's an interesting segue to a conversation that we're all having, which is what is effective? And, we can talk about so many things, Cathryn, and I could literally spend the day with you kind of debriefing and exploring all these thoughts that I'm having, whether it's about the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, or whether it's about the peaceful protests that I've assisted in facilitating in Santa Fe and been engaged with a little bit, and what is effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we decide what's effective? In other words, I guess what I'd like us to maybe explore a little bit is the why, which is why do we see what's going on right now in terms of the way people are getting their message out about what's important and about why they're frustrated, why they're angry, why they're hurt, why they're enraged. And I guess when you try and figure out what's effective, you maybe start on one end of the spectrum, but unless you're seen or heard, you continue to move on that spectrum of delivery methods for your message. And I guess that's maybe what leads us to where we are today. Do you think that's a fair? Do you see what I'm saying? I guess let me try and be more clear. I'm sorry. It's surprising to me how emotionally charged this is for me, and I apologize if I'm not as clear as I normally am. I find myself speaking only at 20 words a minute, which I normally speak at 40 to 60 words a minute.
Right.
But it's because I struggle with trying to articulate properly what I'm trying to feel and what I'm trying to express. But if you can go with me, what I guess I'm saying is that people are saying, okay, well, what's with the violent acts or what's with the destruction? And I wonder why they're not asking the question, well, why is that happening? And is that level of effectiveness that you're seeking in your delivery methods that you're adjusting, right? Like you're telling me you've adjusted and you're growing in these delivery methods in determining what's effective. And isn't that maybe part of what's going on that we see today is that delivery methods that people have tried to do in the past have not been delivering on outcomes. And so then people look for different methods of delivering their message in seeking change.
So when we talk about delivery methods, and I think we want to make sure that we say that for the most part, protests have been peaceful and they have been organized by people who have the right intent. And there are those situations that devolve into looting and rioting, and it's not clear always who's responsible for those who instigated it. But we know that sometimes that has been one of the things that's happened, and our focus is always on the bad part, the things that happen with the protests, and as you say, not on the why. And so, and on the peaceful parts of the protest. So people are fed up, they are angry. There's a writer from The Root named Harriet, Harriot, that talks about all of the things that led up to the 2020 Fed uprising, and that people are really tired, and that this has gone on for a long time. And what I've often said, and I think the last time I came on your program, we talked about the fact that perhaps this pandemic is amplifying things and making them uglier as they're being exposed, but they've been going on for a really long time. So you can go back to 1619. You can go back, all the way back for all the things that have happened that have been designed to discriminate against people of color, African Americans. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment all deal with African Americans and giving us rights. And when this country was started, the Constitution was established, Black people were not considered to be even a full person, so not considered to be human. There's a correspondent on ABC, Pierre Thomas, whom I love to watch, as he, I think, is a great journalist. And what he said really resonated with me, is that what we are upset about, what I'm upset about, is that we're considered to be a suspect first and a citizen second. And that therein lies the issue, is how you see me. What do you see when you see me? You see a Black woman. So I'd like people to get educated about the fact that race is an American construct. It is created by us to ensure that there are people that are other. There are white people, and then there are other people. And we assign categories and rights to the other, but everything to benefit the system that is based on the needs of white people.
Yep. And the timepiece that I talked to you about before we came to camera addresses a little bit of that. And I want to encourage people. I posted a few links up while you were sharing those heavy words and important words. But this, I posted the timepiece that I talked about. And I think it speaks to that a little bit in terms of framing how I look at things and what you're talking about right now, which is our default position. I am white. I can't explain my whiteness, but I know you're different. And I know that you, well, let me just leave it at that. I'll let the Time article speak for itself. But I want to thank Alex Flores for posting the Roots article that you already referenced, or the Root article that you referenced earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that link has also been posted up. So I want to encourage our viewers this morning to go back and take some time to hit that article that Cathryn McGill mentioned during those remarks. Go ahead.
And I was just talking to my sister and my neighbor, Susan Peck, about this article a couple of days ago. And I've done a lot of work with the First Unitarian Church here in Albuquerque. Mm-hmm. And, I want to shout them out, because I want to say that, in my own journey of trying to figure out, how I'm able to do my work, under-resourced, trying to figure out how to make $1 out of 15 cents on a regular basis, that First Unitarian Church, when I went to them and said, I need a place to have my camp, they gave me a key, and they said, we want to double down on assisting you. Now, I will tell you that, there were some difficult conversations, and my good friend, Reverend Angela Herrera, who's over there, and if you don't know her, you should, and she's doing amazing work. We had our camp there one year, and we were, I think, moving out, and so we had a U-Haul truck. This is in broad daylight, and so we were moving our camp materials out so that we could end the day. I out because I want to say that, and there were some people that came by who I believe were members of the church, who questioned why we were there, what we were doing, because they were unaware of the fact that we had our camp there. Now, there's several Black people moving things out of their church structure, and they questioned us about why we were there. And what I wanted to say to them at that point is that we're a little smarter than trying to rob the church in broad daylight with all these people standing out here. But we use it as an opportunity to talk with the leadership of the church and explain to them how that made us feel, and perhaps how it could have been approached. Like, we definitely want people to protect their property.
Sure.
But why did you assume that we were there to rob the church? And so that was a teachable moment for us with the Unitarian Church. And they doubled down on, what, we're going to embrace this work in our white fragility, and some of our members who we don't want to excuse because of their age holding these views, but then we're going to confront it head on and talk about it and invite people in to speak to us and not have us control the conversation, but have it be centered and focused on these kind of issues so that we can address ourselves why we do what we do. And there's a quote by Eckhart Tolle that I want to read that says, "You are not in the universe, you are the universe, an intrinsic part of it. Ultimately, you are not a person, but a focal point where the universe is becoming conscious of itself. What an amazing miracle." And so I've used that quote in a training that created with Dr. Stephanie McIver that focused on asking the question first, and I'll ask it to you, Brian. Do you believe that the system that we operate within and under is doing a good job? Is our education system good? Is our criminal justice system fair? Is our economy and wealth equally distributed? What would you answer if I ask you those questions?
Yeah. No, I think it's easy to say that the system's not working. And I think that it works for some, and it works at a far worse rate for other particular groups in our society. And what I mean by that is, obviously, I practiced law for 20 years. You know that, Kathy, and I saw firsthand how the system is so flawed. And I primarily did civil law and not criminal law, but I did some work at the DA's office, and it becomes evident quite quickly how the system serves those who have resources, and the system is incredibly pressured to attempt to serve those who don't have resources, but it most often ends at an attempt as opposed to serving those who have limited resources. And that translates into disproportionate incarceration rates. It
Mhm.
translates into inequitable um, distribution of sentencing,
Mhm.
um, and some as blatant as what we saw when it came to, now we're going back 20 years, but what we saw when it came to the distribution of justice as it related to crimes that, um, you know, are sentencing for crack versus pure cocaine.
Mhm.
And, like that, everybody can now all of a sudden we're awake and we go, wait, that's not right. But for a long period of time, we just said, oh yeah, that's okay. And,
Right.
or we didn't bother even questioning it, right? I think even more to the point, we didn't even bother contemplating it, which is
Mhm.
where these conversations are important because it gets us to contemplate those issues. The education system, it's not a coincidence that you can correlate educational success to income in particular zip codes. It's not a coincidence that where Aleli teaches in the deepest pocket of poverty at Van Buren Middle School, the dropout rate, the mobility rates are some of the highest that we have in the state. That's not a coincidence. And so the education system hasn't found a way to address those issues. And we don't talk about it enough in those terms.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we, instead of talking about it, we have to be about it, right? And it would require some very difficult decisions to, maybe not difficult, but courageous decisions to change those things. Um, I want to say too that there are many issues that exist that can't be solved by money. And because we've thrown a lot of money at a lot of issues, and we still are having the same conversations about why it's not working. And it is the system and the approach that we are taking that, and the way in which we distribute our resources, that is the issue. And Abraham Lincoln, said, government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And we're in danger of perishing because we have not lived up to that. We are not of the people, we are not for the people, and we definitely are not by the people. And so, if we look at that as our compass, how do we become of the people? Who are we pledged to serve? And how do we come by the people? This is another area where we have to figure out how we organize together and how we make sure that we have the right people at the table. We have so many homogenous conversations. And I always say that if you have a room full of 5-year-olds making decisions, they're going to come out saying, we need to stay up longer, and we need to eat more ice cream, because that's the lens that they are coming from with their 5-year-old brains. So if you have a group of people that are all the same in a room making decisions, they're going to make those decisions that benefit them, and perhaps completely unaware, and sometimes totally aware, of how it excludes other people. Let us not think that there are no issues in New Mexico. The narrative that has existed in New Mexico that plays out in our policies, and in the way that we distribute wealth, is based on a tricultural narrative of Anglo, Native American, and Hispanic. And people will say that all the time. And the reason, and sort of the foundation of the work that we're doing, is to really truly change that narrative so that we are promoting true multiculturalism. And it doesn't exist. If you look at the budgets of the state of New Mexico, the city of Albuquerque, the county of Bernalillo, and any of the counties throughout the state as an instructive document that's going to tell us what our values are. Who are we supporting? And what we'll say is that, well, there's not enough Black people here to focus on. But I would say let's reframe that. Let's reframe it so that we say that we have a population of citizens of New Mexico who are Black and African American. And when I'm talking about this, I'm not excluding other cultures. So let me say here before I go on that, I started using Audre Lorde's quote that there's no hierarchy of oppression. So I'm not trying to pit myself against or our community against other communities. In fact, that is an issue that we need to address as well in the philanthropic community. Don't make me compete against other people for what are problems that need to be solved. But Toni Morrison wrote a book that said your blue, she said that your blues ain't like mine. So even though I'm not saying that that my oppression is greater than someone else's, or that we need to compare how bad is it. What I'm saying is that it deserves equal attention, and that there is enough if we look at how we're distributing resources and the people that are making the decisions and the lens that they bring to the discussion. There is enough, but it takes a lot of courage to upend the systemic racism that exists in the system, where when we show up, we are the people. People say, well, yes, Cathy, we know there's a problem, but we just don't have any money. Well, the issue is that you don't have any money for me. You have money for things that you want to do. I worked for the city for a lot of years, and I worked in an organization where, if we decided we wanted to settle something in risk management, it didn't matter what the dollar amount was, you could have a check in 15 minutes.
Yeah, no question. I want to highlight kind of the systemic vein that you brought out there, and give you what I consider to be a great example, and something I've advocated for change. Maybe not hard enough, but I'll continue to advocate and be a voice to change. But simply take a look at our cabinet structure at our gubernatorial level. Mm-hmm. Not this governor, not the one before, but the one before that. We elevated or maybe it was 4 governors ago. I'm losing track now. But we have a cabinet secretary for Indian Affairs, right? Mm-hmm. And what do we have for African Americans? We have an Office of African American Affairs, mm-hmm. who is not a cabinet member.
Underfunded.
Now, and then then gets even more to your point about funding streams. Mm-hmm. But and maybe the governor treats Scott as though he's a cabinet member. I don't know whether he's in the cabinet meetings or not, but I know it's not a cabinet level position. Mm-hmm. And that in itself sends a signal, and that in itself decreases the capacity for that individual to be engaged in a conversation with all the other cabinet secretaries who are discussing issues that are important, and sometimes overly important to which populations of color, and African Americans and Black people in New Mexico, which I think are 3 to 5%. I think it's three.
It's about 3%, and we're heavily involved in the discussion about the census because we know that there's historic undercount.
We love the tiny concerts. Whose idea was that?
This lady that we know, and a whole bunch of other people who came together who agreed to allow us to do it, and that sort of gives me a opportunity to talk about the fact that we have to find new ways to say the same thing, and so Tiny Census Concerts that I helped to create was about looking for a new way to talk about the census message. So we had to look for a new way to talk about systemic racism, and we have to have some real courage. And I want to mention something that Reverend Dr. William Barber, who is the chair of the Poor People's Campaign, and for people who don't know, that was started by Dr. Martin Luther King right before he was assassinated. And it's been reinvigorated by Reverend Barber. And what he said is that we want to create a movement and not a moment. And the protests that are happening right now will only be a moment if underneath them there is not an agreement that there will be change. And that change happens by upending the power structures and denouncing racist institutions, looking at collective ways of restructuring, and looking at those budget documents.
Well, we also, but I just want to say this, because when I hear you say racist institutions, I think white people, or even me as a Hispanic, you know, I think it's something much different than what I think we ought to be thinking of based on our conversation, which is it's not just racist institutions, but it's institutions with systemic racism.
Right.
Right. And I think there's a distinction there with a difference. Right. I think.
I forgot you were a lawyer. Here we go. A distinction with a difference. I love that.
No, but I mean, look,
but let's explain.
Think about the example that I gave, right? Like,
well, let's explain a distinction with a difference. Explain that first.
I don't think that the governor's cabinet is a racist institution. And I don't think anybody thinks of the governor's cabinet as a racist institution. When you say we've got to evaluate racist institutions. But that construct has systemic racial bias.
Okay, well then let's go there. Let's talk about that inherent within the structure of that system. It is built to benefit a few people. It is built to benefit a few. There's no question. And that the system perpetuates that over time. How do you change it? You don't change it just by saying, well, we are going to talk about systemic racism. You actually have to go back and be educated about how to contextualize where it came from, understanding its current manifestations, what's going on right now, today, what are we doing? And then what are we going to do about it in the future? And it means more than saying, well, we've got a diversity, equity, and inclusion department.
Well, Esteban actually made your point earlier. I think it was Esteban in the comments, where he said, look, you know, we he didn't use this word, but it's the one that came to mind, and it seems fitting. We whitewash our history, right? And we talk in a very almost sterile way about the historical context of the plight of African Americans and Black people in America. And until we actually have a real reckoning with what that true history looked like and educate the next generation about that, we can't have an honest conversation about where we are today.
But, you know, I have to say that this is a nuanced conversation because, so I want to go back to the question we asked earlier. It's like, does the system work? Everybody would say the system is broken and it doesn't work. And somehow we separate ourselves from that. And what I want to see happen, and the new focus as we accept our individual responsibility, is that people would be able to say, I am the system, therefore I am the solution. Which is why we, you know, have to sort of get rid of the labels of leaders and, you know, just, you know, who's making the decisions, and sort of empower everyone to be that leader and to understand that you have a role in going back to say, if you're sitting in the room where you know that the conversation is not inclusive, that the policy or the procedures that you put in place exclude, what's your role in saying, I can't participate in that, and we have to stop and do better because we know better? How do we make that change?
Well, I think it's powerful to actually acknowledge and say out loud that you know, when we say the system's broken, that means, you know, we are the system. We have not just an obligation, but an opportunity to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Should we talk about that late night phone call we had about
Yeah.
the fact that you posted a picture on Facebook with your staff, and I can't remember, it was some celebratory thing, and I looked and I said, there is not a single person of color in this picture.
Well, let's be more specific, because there were plenty
Right.
of people of color in the picture,
Right.
including
So be more specific.
A
Mm-hmm.
lot of Hispanics,
Right.
Asians, more women than men. That doesn't hit the color part, but there was lots of. We were actually celebrating diversity and inclusion.
That's what
Uh,
it was. And I said, but
and
wait a minute.
right,
Right.
and then I was able to give you the litany of outreach that I had done, which I will put up against any agency in New Mexico in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what I did to try and recruit
Mm-hmm.
women and men of color to come into our office.
Right.
And that's how we started the conversation. But it was really
Right.
late, and I
It
think
was
you
really
sent
late
me
at
an
night.
instant. You
And
sent me an instant. Forgive me for being distracted, but you and I talked so much before we got started that my battery's running low on my computer.
oh my
I can't
goodness.
plug in.
Okay,
But
we'll
you
plug it
sent me an
in.
instant messenger like I don't know, it was like 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
you ever expected me to respond. And there I was. And we
There
had a
you were.
conversation like at 1 o'clock in the morning, I think it was.
I know, and I appreciated you getting back to me. And so, what it brought up and what we were able to get to, and what I think we have to get to, is why is that? Why were you not able to recruit? So we go all the way back to, people, young African Americans leaving the state thinking, I have to get out of here. Like, if I'm going to be
Right.
successful, I got to go somewhere else. So we've got, the issue of, the brain drain of, students thinking that they can't find themselves here and needing to go somewhere else. We also have the issue of our education system, and, whether or not it's working for our Black students. And a lot of times people just want to equate income, poverty conditions to academic achievement. What we see is that there are, across socioeconomic strata, there are problems with Black children being educated in a system that neither understands them or recognizes that they are smart, intelligent. How do you decide who you're going to allow to go to AP classes? Who makes those decisions? Who makes the decisions about who's going to be referred to discipline? What container do we have them in? Who is looking out for those students? The largest number of Black students in the APS system are at a school pretty near my office, and the literacy and numeracy rate of that school is 10%. Anywhere else, that would be a crisis if fully 90% of the students were in those categories. But what we get instead is like, well, there's not enough of you here to focus on those things. And I want, if I could, wave a magic wand, is for us to reframe that to say, let's look at it from the other point of view. Because there is a small number, our interventions, if we have the appropriate interventions, and we have many brilliant people who would be able to come up with some ways to shift those numbers, would have a huge impact.
Sure.
Because it's not good enough to say that only 67, 68, 69% of our students even graduate from high school. When I grew up in Muskogee, Oklahoma, 100 years ago, that was a commitment we made as a community, that we're going to at least get our kids graduated from high school. And I think we have to make that commitment here. We can't be happy with 68% or 70%, and it goes up by 1% and then we congratulate ourselves. We can't do it any longer.
No, I agree with that.
And so we have to then say, so what do we do to make sure that's not the case? Everything, pull out all the stops, and don't say, well, we don't have any money, we can't do it. And you also can't do things the way you've been doing them expecting different results.
Right.
It's going to be the same.
Right.
So how do we create a movement underneath these protests that are happening right now in this current uprising? How do we use that as an opportunity in the midst of this adversity to create true systemic change? And unless and until we have those discussions, substantive, systemic change, then it is business as usual. And white people are allowing themselves to be congratulated because they showed up at a rally.
I think that's right. And I'm allowing myself to be congratulated because I did some outreach and failed.
Well, you know, but what I'm saying to you is that you're not completely responsible for all of it. You're not 100% responsible, but collectively we can make a difference. So you have to like then start to, you know, peel back the onion, trace all that back. Why can't you recruit? So understand why you can't.
No, and I think that's right. And for me, and in my organization, maybe I have even more layers of challenges, right? Because the Office of the State Auditor is a very particular area of work that requires individuals with capacity that is in a field that has done a horrible job of attracting minorities to join the profession. And what I'm talking about is the profession of accountancy and auditing. And so what did I do? Well, we've created through the New Mexico Society of CPAs, we've created a subcommittee, you know, more bureaucracy, but a subcommittee to try and understand what are the barriers and how do we remove those barriers and how do we do a better job of recruiting so that the very small handful of accountants in New Mexico who are women and men of color are willing to be in a pool of individuals who would contemplate civil service, as opposed to just the private sector where they are seen as 24 karat solid gold, right? When it comes to recruiting, how do we change the population that can actually engage with my office? And
right.
That's going to require a lot longer.
Peel it back.
Right. It's going to require a lot longer time than I have as state auditor, even if I run for re-election.
Right.
But if
I'll vote for you, Brian. I promise I'm going to vote for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. But you're right. So, you know, so that's a step, right? So you created this committee and then you start to really, really, really look at what do we do? What can we do? How do we, you know, go back and undo some of the issues that we have that have made it difficult for us to recruit? So maybe you look at creative ways, you know, going into elementary schools, and it starts with, you know, numeracy. That if you have teachers telling young girls, especially Black girls, you know, sweetie, it's okay, you know, you're not good at math. Tell them that, you know what, you are a rock star. Right. Of course you can be good at math. Here's all it takes. And then maybe looking at how you're teaching them. You know, in some cases, you know, you go into these rooms and you're thinking, well, I don't understand it either. I don't like the way it's being taught. Let's look at it a different way. You know, arts integration is a method that I really find to be very successful. Look at a new way. Figure out a different way, because your goal is that all the students would learn, and believing that all students are capable of learning. So it starts all the way back there. The first time someone says to you in your school, well, that's okay, you're not good at math. So then that cuts off a whole avenue. It's over.
It's over.
And how many times does that happen in schools with students of color?
Yep.
So why not give somebody a chance?
And that's why Aleli is so valuable in the classroom, right? She's an immigrant from a third world country. English is not her first language, and she's in the international district, and she gets to embrace young girls and encourage them to grow up to be astronauts because she's a math teacher and she's about to have her PhD in education, first
Yay.
generation naturalized citizen.
Right.
And like, we don't have enough of that.
Mhm.
And we don't have enough people that even understand the value of that. Or maybe
Right.
not, they could understand it if they contemplate it. But I
If they
think part of
contemplate.
what that's part of what I guess I'm trying to do with over the course of the next week or 10 days of guests, starting with you, is to actually get us to start contemplating these things. You know, Esteban says, see, we start studying in bureaucracy instead of just simply reaching out and listening. That's fair, Esteban. But unless we create the bureaucracy that says we need to go do this outreach, the outreach
Mhm.
doesn't happen. And that's what we're trying to do with the New Mexico side of CPAs is say, okay, how do we get into the schools? And I'm not talking about the high school seniors because it's too late by then.
Go to the elementary school.
God, exactly. It's why we created years ago, almost 20 years ago, Lely and I started with Fred, the UNM New Mexico Hispanic Bar Association Law Camp, so that we could reach out to underserved populations and bring them onto the university campus in middle school, rising 6th and 7th graders, to start telling them that that university belongs to them and that they could grow up to be a college student. Because if we don't fill the pipeline at that age, elementary school, middle school, we are missing the boat.
And I would just say, and you know, I know we're getting to the end of our time, and it went by so fast. And thank you for allowing me just to have, just to talk. I just want to talk about, you know, what I think, and reiterate that I don't speak for everyone. That Brian Stevenson, whom is my idol, and you know, I'm gonna, you know, take this snippet of the conversation and say, Brian, please come and talk to us, with the Equal Justice Initiative, talked about the fact that he didn't think that Brown versus the Board of Education could pass today, that we've actually regressed in terms of our understanding of racism. And so what he said was he put his law practice on hold so that he could focus on culture, and that it's really important for us to focus on culture. So, you know, the museum that he's created that highlights lynchings that people can go to and actually, you know, see our history and not attempt to whitewash the history, but not just to see that, but to say that, you know, the after effects of that have been tremendous, and that you need to see where all of this stuff started in order for us to deconstruct and to rebuild. It requires courage, and it requires more than just rhetoric. It requires more than people showing up in the moment, but we have to figure out how to create the movement, and that must be centered with the inclusion of people who don't look like you at the table. So multicultural, multi-generational, and we have some of our cohort of the mayor's creative youth corps. I've asked them to listen to us today, and so I want to shout out to them because I really believe that these young people who are brilliant are going to be able to pick up the reins, and I'm going to ask them today when we meet with them later today about what did you get out of this, and what do you think we could do right now to make change. But for what is true, and the reason why people are continuing to march day after day, is that we will not accept less. We can't allow ourselves to keep slipping and going back and going back and going back. We have to powerfully move forward. We want to do that together, but we also want you to understand that we're not less than you, that we're equal to you, and that we have the right to have government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Otherwise, we're going to perish from this earth.
What does one say after that? I mean, I think that's really well stated. You know, I guess, you know, we've hit a couple of times, at least two, but maybe even three times, about the importance of contextualization and really kind of better understanding the path and the journey and the context that creates the lens that every Black person in America looks through. And it
Mhm.
may be different. And I know you don't speak for all African Americans and all Black people, nor do I speak for any group of redheaded Puerto Rican Jews who's spent a lifetime in New Mexico. You only speak for you,
Only
and I
me.
get that. I'm sorry.
I said only me.
That's
Yeah.
right. You only speak for you, but
Mhm.
it is a lens that's well informed, and I think that's important. And uh, I hope that we can find systemic ways to better provide that context to our community.
We absolutely can. There is enough, but enough is enough of saying that there isn't enough.
Right. Right. I think that's a great
Because
way.
there is. And so when we walk into those conversations and say, well, you know, we're not going to take the entire brunt of any cuts that need to happen. We had so little to begin with. So let's start looking at everything, put it all on the table. Everything
Yep.
has got to be on the table. And that's what we're asking for.
Yep. No, I appreciate that's an excellent point, particularly in light of the special session we're going to be going into in 2 weeks.
That's why I brought it up.
Thank you for that.
You're
Thank you for that,
welcome.
Cathryn McGill. You're amazing. I appreciate that, and I wonder if you have maybe a couple of the thoughts that we should take away from today's visit, specifically in terms of people like me who are trying to do better and be better, and to try and be a better ally. What should we? Do you have a morsel or two for us to think about the rest of the day before I come to tomorrow's Cafecito con Colon? And let me just say a couple people that I'm going to be bringing on over the course of the next 10 days. I think tomorrow we'll have on Kenneth Scott, our deputy treasurer here in Bernalillo County, incredible young leader who inspires me. We're bringing on Wednesday, let's see, I think we've got Patrick Barrett and Robert Gibson are coming in on a Friday.
Okay.
Patrick he's another good one who challenges my thinking and does it in a way that isn't always comfortable, which is helpful, right? These uncomfortable conversations, and you've made it quite comfortable for me today, Cathryn, but I certainly know that you and I can always have those uncomfortable conversations.
Yes, we can.
Pamela Herndon will be in on Thursday. Saturday, we're bringing in Mike Silva, Rude Boy and Albuquerque Sightseeing, a great entrepreneur. His video after the murder of Mr. Floyd was very powerful for me, and it touched me deeply. And I'll be bringing Mike on. Reached out to Harold Pope. He's coming on, I think, tomorrow, actually. And reaching out to Chad Cooper and some other folks that have been suggested, Hakeem, and we got tons of great suggestions on trusted voices. But I can't think of a better trusted voice that I could have brought on this morning than you, Cathryn McGill, in a very personal way. That's true. But I think also you are a trusted voice in the community because you are the whole package. You allow so many of us to love you for your talents, which opens the door, I think, for a deeper conversation. And I don't think that, I think that's important. I think that's part of, because so many fall in love with you for your talent, and then they get to peel back that very complex onion that is Cathryn McGill.
Wow, thank you. I'm multifaceted.
Okie from Muskogee.
I'm an Okie from Muskogee. I'm multifaceted, warts and all. Certainly not here to try to say that I'm perfect, that I have all the answers. But what I want to say to all of my brothers and sisters who are worried about whether or not am I racist, or being, saying things like I'm not racist, is to recognize that racism is a nuanced thing. And it's not just those people who are holding up misspelled signs, where you're saying, oh my God, look at that hillbilly out there, being a racist person, or who's a member of the Ku Klux Klan. It is you, first of all, not expecting quality from me as a Black person, not expecting me to be able to be the same as you. It is you when you sit in a room where you don't exercise plus one and say, you know what, I'm looking around and it looks like that 5-year-old room that's pretty homogenous. And so probably we're going to come out with some recommendations that mean that we want to stay up longer, eat more ice cream, and watch more TV. Maybe we got to think about how do we diversify this room, which is not just one of each, but that we go beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion to humanism, so that my interests are represented whether I'm in the room or not. And to look around and to see what you do. I would even ask people to look at your Facebook page. How many people that are you really friends with, that you really interact with, that are on your page? Do you live a homogenous life? Sandra and Matthew Blakesley wrote a book that says the body has a mind of its own. And that picture that you posted today with me singing came from a TED Talk that I did a while ago called The Irony of Amazing Grace. And I talked about that book in my TED Talk, wherein I stated, and quoted from that book, that if you carry a kitten around in its infancy and never allow it to get down and interact with its environment, it will be functionally blind for the rest of its life because it didn't have an opportunity to get down and interact with what was around. And the same is true of us. The same is true when we don't interact, when we don't seek to understand other people and other people's lived experiences. Look at where you live. Look at who you associate with. Look at where you work, who's making the decisions, and what lens they're using. Then and only then, when we understand that I am the system, therefore I am the solution, will there be change.
You're amazing, and I'm grateful. You're amazing. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Brian. So are you.
And this has been a what I hope, at least for me, it certainly was, and I hope for our folks that tuned in today and the 1,000 or 2,000 people that will watch this video over the course of the next 24 hours. I hope that it's as powerful for them as it was for me. I knew that you were the right person to help me begin this journey of bringing people on to help challenge me and to help me question myself and my role in falling forward from this time of turmoil, from this time of pain, from this time of deep suffering, and from a time when, if COVID-19 didn't have us do an introspection, boy, Mr. Floyd's murder has to. And I think that it's a confluence of events that allows us to more deeply reflect, many of us anyway, because we're not in our normal circumstances. And so maybe we're breathing a little deeper than we normally do when we're in the busy, hustling, bustling days of our normal life, quote unquote normal life. So I think in some ways the timing is powerful, and you are powerful, and you are somebody I see and hear, and I trust, and I appreciate, and thank you for coming on today.
All right, Brian. Bye-bye.
God bless. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you tomorrow on Cafecito con Colon. Join me again over the course of the next 10 days or so. We'll be bringing on trusted voices and people that have influenced me on my journey, and I hope you'll stay with me, and I hope that you'll continue to provide the feedback, the comments. We've had, I think, over 150 comments. We had anywhere from 40 to 75 people join us live today. I hope it's been helpful. Hopefully it's been instructive, and I am confident and optimistic that we will fall forward as a community, and we will become better versions of ourselves as we strive to be the best versions of ourselves we were created to be. Reach out to people who in your life are trusted voices. If you know a person of color who may be struggling right now with the current set of circumstances, I hope that you'll reach out and make sure, just like we've been doing for the last 70 days, make sure they know they may be in isolation, but they're not alone, and that you want to become a better ally. I appreciate you. Thank you for being my therapist on this Cafecito con Colon, which is also known as Brian Colon's Extrovert Therapy. I appreciate you. I love you. And I love New Mexico and its multicultural landscape. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.